Welcome to Paskvan Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Today, we're looking closely, really closely, at a case that's it's built on a devastating contradiction. It's about how an ordinary life, full of promise, ended behind a locked door in a way that seems almost impossible.
Exactly. We're examining the death of Ellen Rae Greenberg. And what makes this case so compelling and, frankly, disturbing is this clash between the official story and what the physical evidence seems to scream.
Right. It's like two narratives running parallel, but they just don't meet. The institutional account versus the silent testimony of the forensic facts.
And that demands we ask some hard questions, What does it actually take for a truth, especially an inconvenient one, to be acknowledged by the system?
So our aim here is to really unpack all the information we have. We'll look at the forensic details, piece together the timeline of that night, and follow the long, arduous battle her family has fought.
A fight for answers, essentially, trying to make sense of something that, on the surface, just doesn't make sense.
Okay, let's set the scene. January 26, 2011, Philadelphia. The sources really paint a picture here. It wasn't just winter. It was a major snowstorm.
A really heavy one. It basically shut the city down. Schools closed early, businesses too. Streets were quiet. There's this sense of isolation. Everything's sealed off.
And Ellen Greenberg, she was 27, a first-grade teacher, described as, cheerful, ambitious.
Very much so. Taught at Juniata Park Academy. By all accounts, loved her job, loved by her students. And she was busy planning her wedding to Sam Goldberg, who worked in TV production.
Her life was definitely on an upward trajectory. Lots of plans, excitement, not someone you'd picture in despair.
Absolutely not. The narrative of her life just doesn't align with what supposedly happened later that day.
So she leaves school early because of the snow, like everyone else, and heads back to her apartment, Venice Lofts in Manioc, right? A secure building?
Correct. And later that afternoon, she does something completely normal. She calls her mom.
And the accounts of that call.
Totally mundane. Chatting about regular things, wedding stuff, everyday life. The family is adamant there was zero sign of distress, no hint of anxiety, no crisis. Just a normal conversation.
Then there's this small detail found later that really sticks with you.
The fruit salad. Yeah. Half finished, sitting on the kitchen counter like she was just interrupted. Mid-task, preparing food, settling in for a quiet night because of the storm. It speaks volumes about the suddenness of whatever occurred.
That sense of normalcy just shatters when her fiancé, Sam, comes home. He'd been in the building's gym, gets back to their apartment, 6th floor, around 6:30 p.m.
Right. He uses his key, the lock turns, but the door only opens a little bit. It's caught.
And what's stopping it?
The internal swing bar lock, the kind of security latch you flip across from the inside. It was engaged.
Meaning, theoretically, it had to be locked from the inside, which becomes really the linchpin of the official conclusion.
It absolutely does. That little piece of metal essentially dictated the entire narrative that followed, despite everything else.
So Sam's locked out. What does he do? He starts texting Ellen.
Yeah, and the texts, they show this progression. Start simple. Hello, open the door.
But then the tone shifts when she doesn't answer.
It does. It becomes impatient. What are you doing? Then, you better have an excuse. And it escalates further.
To the point of frustration, even anger.
Seems that way. The message is read, I'm getting mad. Hello, you better answer me. What's wrong? That shift in tone from apparent concern to irritation is something critics later seized on.
Asking, essentially, if you're worried someone's hurt, is anger the first reaction?
Precisely. It raised questions about the timeline and his state of mind right then.
Okay, so texts aren't working. He can't get in. What's his next move?
He goes downstairs to get help from building security, asks them to open the door.
But they refuse.
They do. Strict policy. They won't override a lock engaged by a tenant from the inside. It's a privacy and security issue for them. Can't just break into someone's apartment.
So, security won't help. He's back upstairs at the door.
And he decides he has to force it. He starts kicking or ramming the door, trying to break that internal latch.
And eventually he succeeds.
Yes. The force breaks the lock mechanism, the metal bar likely tearing away from the frame. The door swings open.
And he enters the apartment, which ironically means the scene is immediately altered by his forced entry right before he discovers what's inside.
That's right. The act of entry itself changes the scene, even as it reveals the situation within.
So Sam forces the door open. What does he find?
It's immediate. He sees Ellen on the kitchen floor. She's collapsed, not moving.
And the most jarring detail.
The knife. It's protruding from her chest area, visible right away, a truly chilling sight.
He calls 911, first responders, paramedics arrive quickly. Snow is tracked in. It's chaotic.
Yes, and they assess Ellen very quickly. It's clear she's already gone. But right away, they're facing this paradox.
Let's break that down. On one side, the apartment itself, what did it look like?
Incredibly neat, almost undisturbed. No furniture knocked over, no signs of a fight, no drawers pulled out, nothing ransacked. Her purse, phone, wallet, all there, untouched.
Except for the door latch he just broke.
Exactly. Apart from that damage Sam caused getting in, the apartment seemed sealed, almost pristine. Like nothing violent could have happened there. It suggested isolation.
But then there's Ellen herself. The condition of her body told a completely different story, didn't it?
A starkly different story. Visually, even before a detailed exam, there were obvious wounds cuts on her chest, her abdomen, her arms.
And when the medical examiner did the full examination?
The number was shocking. 20 separate wounds. 20! Inflicted with a sharp object, presumably the knife found at the scene. Those weren't superficial.
And here's the detail that just stops you in your tracks.
Yes.
The location of many of those wounds.
Yes. 10 of the 20 wounds were to the back of her neck and the back of her head. 10.
That single fact, it must have immediately created confusion.
Right.
How do you reconcile a neat, locked room with that kind of brutal, extensive injury, especially in that location?
Immense confusion. The first responders, the initial investigators on scene, they were split. The locked door screamed one thing. She was alone. It had to be self-inflicted.
But the body screams something else entirely.
Completely. 20 wounds. 10 to the back of the neck. That pattern, that sheer number, the location, it just didn't fit any typical pattern of self-harm. It looked like an attack. Some described the wounds as oddly placed, atypical.
So in those initial hours and days, how did the medical examiner's office interpret this conflicting evidence?
Initially, they went with the physical evidence on the body. Dr. Marlon Osborne conducted the autopsy at the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office.
And his conclusion?
Based on the number, the location, the nature of the wounds, he concluded it was death by assailant, homicide.
What specific findings supported that? Did the autopsy report detail why?
Oh, yes. The report noted the depth of the main chest wound the knife was lodged against bone, indicating significant force. It documented the cluster pattern of the other wounds, suggesting a frenzy, but one more consistent with an attack than self-harm, which often shows hesitation marks or fewer, more targeted wounds.
And the neck wounds.
Those were obviously a huge factor. Inflicting 10 wounds to the back of your own neck is, well, it's incredibly difficult, bordering on physically impossible from a biomechanical standpoint. Dr. Osborne's initial ruling reflected that forensic reality.
So for a period, the official record reflected that Ellen Greenberg was the victim of an attack.
The scene was strange, yes, but the conclusion seemed dictated by the evidence on her body.
That's correct. The initial finding was clear. The body told a story of violence inflicted by another.
But then that initial clarity just evaporated.
It did, fairly quickly, too. Weeks after Dr. Osborne ruled it death by assailant, things changed. And importantly, this change happened largely out of public view.
Behind closed doors. Essentially, yes. Sources describe meetings involving the ME's office, police investigators, people from the district attorney's office. There seems to have been pressure, maybe, or at least a strong push to resolve the ambiguities of the case without a full-blown, complex homicide investigation.
And the outcome of these discussions?
Complete reversal. The official manner of death was changed from death by assailant to self-inflicted death.
Okay, this is the core of the controversy. What was the official reason given for overturning the forensic pathologist's initial finding? How did they justify this 180-degree turn?
The justification really boiled down to the circumstances of the scene, not the body. They put almost all the weight on the locked swing bar latch, arguing it proved she was alone.
So the lock trumped the 20 wounds?
It appears so. They also cited a lack of foreign DNA found on Ellen or the knife, though the specifics and thoroughness of that testing have been questioned later. And they pointed to the lack of widespread signs of struggle in the apartment itself, like overturned furniture.
Basically, the sealed room argument won out over the physical evidence of attack.
That's how it seems. The police then worked to build a narrative that could somehow accommodate this. They focused on potential stressors in Ellen's life, her teaching job, the upcoming wedding.
And her medication.
Yes, they noted she had recently been prescribed Klonopin, an anti-anxiety drug, and Trazodone, an antidepressant sometimes used for sleep. Neither typically associated with inducing violent psychosis, but it became part of the narrative.
So the theory was, what? That these pressures, combined maybe with the medication, caused her to suddenly snap,
That was the implication, that she experienced some kind of acute, sudden psychotic break and entered a frenzy, inflicting these wounds on herself without rational thought. It's a psychological explanation aimed at forcing the physical evidence into the locked room box.
But how did that explanation sit with the people who actually knew Ellen? Her family, her friends?
They rejected it completely, outright. Her parents, Joshua and Sandra Greenberg, were adamant this wasn't their daughter. She was happy, excited about the future, meticulously planning her wedding down to the flowers and honeymoon.
No history of severe mental illness or previous attempts.
None whatsoever. Friends echoed the parents' view. The idea that she was secretly harboring this level of turmoil and it erupted so violently, with no warning. It just didn't ring true to anyone who knew her.
And then there's the lack of, well, any final message.
A crucial point. In many cases of determined self-harm, especially violent ones, there's often something left behind. A note, a text, an email, some final communication.
But here?
Nothing. Absolute silence. Her last known activities were making dinner and talking to her mom about normal things. For the family, this silence wasn't proof of a sudden snap. It was proof she didn't intend to end her life. She was caught unawares.
So the official ruling created this massive, unavoidable contradiction. It's believed that this happy, future-oriented woman inflicted 20 wounds, 10 to the back of her own neck, then locked the door.
Oh.
Or believed the physical evidence.
And that's the battle line that was drawn. The family simply could not accept the official conclusion. It felt to them like a denial of physical reality, and that's when their long fight began.
Facing this official ruling that seemed, frankly, unbelievable, the Greenbergs sought outside help. They needed independent experts to look at the evidence.
Yes, they consulted several highly respected forensic pathologists. Perhaps the most prominent name involved was Dr. Cyril Wecht.
A very well-known figure in forensic science. What did Dr. Wecht and the other independent experts conclude after reviewing the autopsy files, the photos, everything?
Their conclusion was unanimous and starkly different from the official one. They essentially said the ruling of self-inflicted death is not supported by the forensic evidence. Dr. Wecht, in particular, was very direct. He stated the findings were consistent with death by assailant.
They argued it was physically impossible.
Pretty much. They focused heavily on the biomechanics, how the body moves, what's physically possible.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those 10 wounds to the back of the neck and head first. Why did the experts say self-infliction there was nearly impossible?
Okay, walk us through that.
Well, think about it. Try reaching behind your own head to the base of your skull or upper neck with enough force and control to inflict deep, repeated wounds with a knife. It requires awkward, extreme contortion.
You'd have to twist your arm way back, maybe over your shoulder.
Exactly. And to do it 10 times with consistent force in a relatively clustered area, it's incredibly difficult. The autopsy notes also suggested some wound tracks had a downward angle, which is even harder to achieve on yourself from behind.
So the argument is the angles and clustering just don't fit self-infliction dynamics.
Right. The experts argued that pattern is much more consistent with an attacker positioned behind or above the victim, who has the leverage and clear access needed to strike that area repeatedly and forcefully. It suggests incapacitation or attack from behind.
Then there's the final deep chest wound, the one with the knife still in place. How did that challenge the official narrative?
This was another major point. The autopsy showed that knife went deep, hitting bone. Think about the scenario. If Ellen had already inflicted 19 other painful wounds, including 10 to her head and neck, she'd likely be weakened, in shock, perhaps losing consciousness or motor control.
So mustering the strength and coordination for that final, powerful, accurate thrust
seems highly improbable. The experts argued that kind of forceful, targeted wound, especially after sustaining so much trauma, is far more indicative of an external assailant delivering a final blow. It speaks of focused intent, not the fading actions of a dying person.
Beyond the wounds themselves, did the independent experts find other evidence pointing to an attack? Signs of a struggle?
Yes, they did. While the apartment was neat overall, Ellen's body wasn't. Examination of the photos revealed bruising and abrasions on her arms, her hands, wrists.
Consistent with what?
Consistent with defensive wounds. Marks you might get raising your arms to block blows, or trying to grab at a weapon or an attacker. There were also other bruises noted that could suggest being grabbed or restrained. These signs pointed towards interaction, towards a struggle, not just isolated self-harm.
So the independent experts see attack wounds, defensive wounds, but the official ruling keeps coming back to that locked door. How did the critics address the sealed room aspect?
They argued the authorities were too fixated on the lock, possibly due to a lack of understanding of its potential vulnerabilities. Some analyses suggested that type of swing bar lock isn't foolproof. It might be possible to manipulate it from the outside or bypass it subtly.
But the more prominent theory involves staging, right?
Yes, that's the theory that aligns the physical evidence with the scene. If you accept the overwhelming evidence of an attack, then the locked door has to be explained somehow. The most logical explanation for many is that the assailant, after the attack, engaged the swing bar lock on their way out.
To deliberately create the impression she was alone.
Exactly. To stage the scene as a sealed room, knowing that this often leads investigators towards a conclusion of self-harm, making their escape cleaner. It suggests the killer prioritized creating that illusion over cleaning up forensic traces perfectly.
And those text messages from Sam Goldberg, they fit into this alternative picture too.
They raise questions, certainly. The shift to anger, the timing. If the attack happened before Sam returned, then the assailant could have locked the door and left just moments earlier. His frustration in the texts might simply be because he's locked out, unaware yet of the horror inside. The time gap between his arrival, the texts, and forcing the door becomes a critical window.
It's a fundamental clash, isn't it? The official side accepts an almost physically impossible act to preserve the meaning of the lock. The critics accept the possibility of staging to honor the physical evidence on the body.
That's the standoff. One explanation requires you to disbelieve basic biomechanics. The other requires you to believe someone could manipulate a scene. For the independent experts, the latter was far more plausible given the state of the body.
This fundamental disagreement, this clash between the official story and the forensic evidence, led Ellen's family down a long, difficult path.
A decade-long legal battle, really. They realized early on they weren't just questioning a finding, they were challenging the entire city's investigative and forensic apparatus. It was a huge undertaking.
They filed lawsuits, didn't they? Against the medical examiner's office, against city officials?
Multiple lawsuits. The core argument was essentially negligence, maybe even incompetence. They argued the manner of death was changed improperly, possibly under pressure, to avoid a complex and potentially unsolvable homicide investigation.
What were they hoping to achieve legally? What was the goal?
Ultimately, they wanted the official record corrected. To have the manner of death changed back to death by assailant, or at the very least to undetermined.
Why is undetermined significant? It's not quite death by assailant.
Undetermined is the classification used when the evidence is genuinely conflicting or ambiguous, when a clear conclusion between, say, attack and self-harm can't be definitively reached. For the Greenbergs, getting it changed to undetermined would be a major step.
How so?
It would formally acknowledge that the official ruling of self-inflicted death is questionable, that the evidence doesn't neatly fit. It would validate the contradictions and, crucially, could potentially reopen the investigation, forcing authorities to admit the locked door wasn't the definitive answer they claimed it was.
Ellen's story has really resonated far beyond Philadelphia. It seems to have become a symbol for something larger.
It really has. It's often cited in discussions about the potential for institutional fallibility, about the struggle individuals face when confronting official narratives that seem to defy logic or evidence. It asks, how accountable are these systems when they might get something wrong?
Does the system protect itself sometimes, even against the facts?
That's the fear it taps into. Can an institution become so invested in its initial conclusion, especially if reversing it is complicated or embarrassing, that it resists contradictory evidence? We see echoes in other controversial cases where initial findings were later overturned only after immense outside pressure.
Like the Kathleen Savio case you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Cases like that highlight how persistent families and external experts sometimes have to be to force a re-examination when the initial ruling just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It shows that systems aren't always self-correcting.
And the media attention on Ellen's case has been intense, largely because of that central, almost unbelievable detail.
Without a doubt. The phrase 20 stab wounds, 10 to the back of the neck is just so jarring, so counterintuitive to the idea of self-harm that it captures public attention. It creates this immediate cognitive dissonance. People hear that and think, wait, how is that possible?
That public fascination keeps the pressure on, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It forces officials to repeatedly address the case, to defend their ruling, even years later. It prevents the case from simply fading away into a closed file.
But through all this, you have the Greenberg family. Enduring this fight, constantly reliving the trauma, not just grieving their daughter, but battling to define how she's remembered.
It's an unimaginable burden. They're fighting not just for a legal classification, but for Ellen's legacy, to ensure she isn't defined by an official narrative they believe is demonstrably false and ignores the physical truth of what happened to her. #outro.
So after all this time, we're left circling back to that same haunting question. How does a young woman, full of life and planning her wedding, end up with 20 wounds, 10 inflicted to the back of her own head and neck, with a knife lodged deep in her chest behind a door locked from the inside? The official explanation requires us to accept something that seems to defy physical possibility.
And that's the heart of the ongoing tragedy here. The difficulty isn't just the lack of clear answers about who might have been involved, if anyone. It's the enduring refusal of the system to fully grapple with the profound inconsistencies between the physical evidence found on Ellen's body and the conclusion they ultimately reached. It really highlights how vulnerable truth can be when it runs up against bureaucratic certainty.
The police, the DA, the ME's office, they eventually decided that the locked door was the key fact, proving Ellen was alone. But the forensic evidence, the silent testimony of her injuries, strongly suggested she was attacked. So we leave you with this thought. If a system chooses to believe the simple mechanics of a door lock over the complex, horrifying story told by a human body, what other truths might be getting overlooked because they're just too inconvenient or too difficult to face? You have to consider for yourself what story makes more sense, what really happened in that sealed apartment on that snowy night.